Sam Houston State University presents the Constellation of Orion. When you look up at the night sky, you see many different pictures and many different constellations. But one of the most recognizable of these is the constellation of Orion. The three stars in Orion's belt are probably the most recognizable, closely knit group of stars in the night sky. But what do you think of when you see these stars in Orion? What do you think of? Do you think Men in Black with that obnoxious cat with a little necklace that has the constellations inside of it? Or do you think of Transformers and think of Optimus Prime, whose original name started out as Orion Pax? Or, if you have a little bit more knowledge about Orion, you may know the names of some of the stars. And then you might think even further back to Beetlejuice, that ridiculous movie from back in the day. Or you may think of Harry Potter, and you may think about Bellatrix Lestrange, terrible person. Or Sirius Black. Sirius, the star, is not actually in the constellation of Orion, but Sirius the dog is a companion to Orion the hunter. Now the Greeks, what they saw Orion the hunter. Now Orion the hunter had many epic battles against various constellations throughout the night sky, and one of the most epic of these battles is Orion versus Scorpio. Now when Orion and Scorpio met, their battle was so destructive and so chaotic that it destroyed the world. But, as in many other Greek mythological stories, the end of the world isn't actually the end of the world. So once the world was recreated, Orion and Scorpio were put in sort of an astronomical timeout. What I mean by this is that you will never see Orion and Scorpio in the night sky at the same time. If Orion is visible, then Scorpio is not, and vice versa. This is because if they were ever to be in the sky at the same time, the Greeks say that the world would once again be destroyed. The last reference of Orion in ancient Greek history is in literature. In Homer's The Odyssey, Orion is used as a constellation for navigation for sailors. Moving on from the ancient Greeks, we see the ancient Egyptians and how Orion affected their society. We look to the three great pyramids of Giza in Egypt. We see that the three pyramids of Giza are a perfect reproduction of the three stars of Orion's belt. Like the pyramids, the three stars of Orion are not perfectly aligned. The smallest of them is slightly offset to the east. Their orientation to the Nile recreates Orion's orientation to the Milky Way galaxy. Also, the layout of the pyramids and the relative sizes were a deliberate design plan, and not the result of three kings' enormous egos, as has been preached by some archaeologists. This is because the Egyptians didn't see a hunter. They saw Osiris, the king of rebirth. The pyramids were made to catapult the pharaohs into heaven. In order to make this match correctly, you have to flip the constellation upside down, where the southmost of the pyramids is the direct link to Orion for the achievement of eternal life. Speaking of Orion's belt, as we move on from ancient history to more modern-day discoveries, we look to Orion's nebula. A fantastic arrangement of colors, this cloud of gas is the closest region of massive star formation that we have. Visible to the naked eye, this is located just south of Orion's belt. Also known as M42, the open star cluster is just over 1,300 light-years away and has a radius of over 12 light-years. M42 is responsible for the majority of our knowledge on how stars and planetary systems are formed. Also, within M42 is an incredibly interesting cluster of stars called the Trapezium. The Trapezium, although still very early in its formation, is already one of the most recognizable star clusters in the night sky. It almost appears as if it's a miniature version of the Little Dipper, and on a clear night, 6 or 7 stars of the trapezium can be visible to the naked eye. Now we're going to move on and start talking about each of the 4 of the outer stars of Orion. The first is the shoulder of Orion, Bellatrix. This is the 3rd brightest star in the constellation of Orion, and it's the 27th brightest star in the night sky. Bellatrix is a massive star with about 8.4 times the Sun's mass. It is approximately 20 million years old, long enough for a star of this mass to consume the hydrogen at its core and begin to evolve away from the main sequence into a giant star. The effective temperature of the outer envelope of this star is 22,000 degrees Kelvin, which is considerably hotter than the 5,700 degrees of the Sun. This high-temperature star gives it its blue-white hue that occurs with B-type stars such as Bellatrix. An estimated distance of 250 light-years away, this star yields a physical size of about 6 times the radius of the Sun. The next star I'm going to talk about is Betelgeuse. The name Betelgeuse comes from the Arabic, and it is basically a rough translation for armpit of the giant, and that's exactly what Betelgeuse is. Betelgeuse is the brightest star in Orion and is one of the largest known stars. It has a diameter about 700 times that of the Sun. It has a rather low surface temperature, which is why it appears orange-red in color. Betelgeuse also emits about 7,500 times as much energy as the Sun. The combination of the size and temperature tells astronomers that the star is a kind of star called a red supergiant, and it is close to the end of its life and will most likely end its life in a supernova explosion. Moving on to the left foot of Orion, we come to the star known as Rigel. Rigel comes from an Arabic phrase that is frequently translated as meaning the left foot of the central one. Rigel is also known as Beta Orionis, and it is an incredibly bright blue-white supergiant that is actually a triple star system. Rigel is 130,000 times as luminous as the Sun, and has a radius that is 74 times greater than that of the Sun. The last of the 4 outer stars in Orion is Saiph. Saiph is Arabic for sword or hilt, and its star marks the right knee of Orion. Saiph is a blue-white supergiant that sits about 820 light-years away. 25 more times massive than the Sun, Saiph boasts a surface temperature of 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Many of the other bright stars in Orion are at the same distance from Earth as Saiph. They were probably formed out of the molecular clouds astronomers have found in Orion. These stars are all destined to collapse on themselves and explode as Type II supernovas. Now that we've given you all the facts behind the history and astronomy of Orion, if you were to go up to a little kid and ask him or her to name something in the night sky, they may be able to tell you some of the same things, even if it's only because they've seen Men in Black or Harry Potter.